guys, I'm really excited to show you how to make these contoured head covers of mine, but first I have to finish my round of books. Okay, I finished my golf game and now I'm going to show you step by step how to make my contoured golf club head cover. You can make this out of one fabric or up to 3 fabrics. I've chosen 2 fabrics for the side, 1 for the main panel, and the piping would be my 3rd color. So since I've already made this club, I think today we'll do the fairway wood. Next, I want to talk about the finishing kit. Oftentimes, the items that you need to complete this project are not found in your local high-end quilting stores, and I'm referring to the rib knit and the piping cord. So I decided it'd be a good idea to put a kit together so you could do a one-stop shopping scenario. And that would be where you would purchase your fabric and your foam from your quilting store. I use the Bosal inner foam. It comes in packages. You could also use other craft foams from different manufacturers. It's commonly referred to as headliner foam, frequently used in bag making, but just make sure you have a nice, sturdy, durable craft foam. And it's really essential to help the golf club head covers hold their shape. The next thing I want to talk about is the pattern. When you get your pattern, you will notice that the pattern pieces are printed on paper. So ideally, you'll want to copy those and cut out a set and use those when you are making your head covers. However, I make a lot of head covers, so I decided to trace mine out on template plastic. That way I can make a whole bunch of head covers and the pattern won't become useless where I have to print it out again. So if you are planning on making a lot of head covers, that's what I would suggest you do. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is your fabric selections. I talk about directional and non-directional fabrics. This is a non-directional fabric, and what that means is you can place your pattern piece anywhere on the fabric that you want without concern about following the grain. But in this case, we're going to use a directional fabric, and it obviously has a top and a bottom, so you would want to have your top of your head cover at the top of the fabric. In this case, I'm also going to do some fussy cutting, and that means I want to have that cap prominent on the side panel. So in order to fussy cut, you waste a lot of fabric, but it doesn't matter because you're getting the look that you want. And in this case, we also flip the pattern over to the opposite side, and so I'm going to pick a different cat to fussy cut and display on my side panel piece. When you do this, you want to make sure that you lay your pattern piece on the fabric with the bottom edge horizontal, and that way the finished product will come out with the proper orientation of the design that you have chosen. Go ahead and select your fabrics, and I will get back with you on how we are going to cut these out. So the first thing that we're going to do is cut out some foam shapes, and we're going to cut them out about a 1/2 inch larger than they need to be. We're going to cut out 2 side panels and 1 center panel. So here's my 2 side panels. Now I have my fairway wood center panel. By the way, we are making a fairway wood today. I've already made the driver head cover, and so when we're finished, I can show you a set. All right, so now I have my 2 foam pieces cut out. So now we're going to cut out the fabrics. So what I've done, I've got a piece, and again, this does not have to be perfect cutting because we are going to trim it down to the appropriate size. But I just want to show you basically how we're going to mark it and then channel stitch it. All right, now fussy cutting comes into play at this point. When you make your fairway woods, you need to have 2 sides facing each other. So I'm going to lay this down this way first, and I'm going to kind of center this cat. And I'm going to cut this out, again, larger than it needs to be. Because when you do your channel stitching, sometimes the fabric will shrink. So let's see, there's my cat. Now I want to have an opposite cat. So I'll take my pattern piece and I'll flip it over. Doesn't have to be the same cat, but I do want to have it kind of look the same. There we go. So now I have my foam and my fabric, my opposite foam and fabric. Notice how the two opposing sides are pointing at each other. And then we have the main panel like this. So now we're going to mark them for channel stitching. Okay, now that we have laid our fabric on top of our foam, I've pressed it to help hold it in place. I'm going to find a center and I'm going to mark. And if you do not have a walking foot, you're going to mark every inch, an inch apart. And I'm using the lines on my cutting mat as my guide. One more. And the reason we're doing this, only an inch apart, even though they are half-inch channels, is because if I stitched all the channels in the same direction, the fabric would kind of get a little skewed. So what we're going to do without a walking foot is we're going to stitch on these 1-inch lines from top to bottom on every one. And then when we're finished with that, we're going to flip it over. We're going to draw new lines down the middle and we're going to stitch from bottom to top. And this will help keep your fabric from becoming skewed. But since I have a walking foot, I can mark my half inches. So I'm going to finish marking this up and then we'll head to the sewing machine. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the different feet that are required to make this project. One of the things that my husband told me once, and it's very true, is you can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't have the right equipment, you will struggle. So I use Bernina. I use the right equipment. The first thing I like to use is this walking foot. The walking foot feeds the fabric through the sewing machine, both the bottom layer and the top layer together. It's really an essential foot. I use it in garment making or any time that I'm just doing a basic straight stitch. This is a fabulous foot. The second foot that we're going to use in this project is the piping foot. It's foot number 12, and it has a groove in the middle where your piping will feed through that groove, and you don't have to keep your eye on staying close to the piping material. If you do not have a piping foot, you can possibly get away with a zipper foot, but you will bring your needle position as far over as you possibly can, and then use this edge and butt it up against your piping, and hopefully that would achieve what you're looking for. And last, I like to use foot number 57. This, if you're a quilter, you have this in your stash already. This is a 1/4 inch foot. It gives you the perfect 1/4 inch when you take this little bar right here and leave it on the outside edge of your material, and as you're sewing around, you will always have a perfect 1/4 inch seam. So these are the feet that I like to use. They're all made by Bernina. I have 2 Bernina machines. They're interchangeable between each machine, and as I said earlier, it's all about the equipment, and this equipment is the bomb. Okay, I have attached my walking foot to my sewing machine, and I've marked every 1/2 inch. So I'm going to begin sewing. I don't have to start in the middle as you would without using a walking foot, but I'm going to just start stitching on my lines. I will increase my stitch length to 3, and I'll go in a so I stitch my line like that. I kind of just flip it around, stitch on this one. I pull it out a bit, turn it around, stitch on this one. So I could do this all the way up on this piece. But I want to show you something because I am all about shortcuts. And many of you may not be, but I am all about shortcuts. So I'm going to show you what I can do without having to mark my fabric. I'm just going to start in the middle and I'm going to stitch straight across. Now the distance between the center and the edge of my walking foot is about a 1/2 inch. So I am just going to then line that up right there and stitch again. Same thing on this side, line this up on that side and stitch again. This is just a time saver that I use because, like I said, I'm always into time savers. But I'm going to do this all the way down the side panel. I'm going to do the same on the other side panel and the same on the main panel piece. So once I have this all stitched, we'll move on to the next part. Okay, I have channel stitched both the side panel pieces, and the next step now is to lay the pattern piece on and to trace around what you're actually going to be cutting out. So I definitely want to make this cat prominent. So I lay my piece and using my chalk marker, I trace around. And then you cut out exactly on your drawn lines. I like to use a pair of scissors for this, as the foam and fabric are awful thick. And you could use your rotary cutter, but you might not get all the way through all the layers. So I just find that using regular scissors works best. So now I want to cut out the other side, and as you know, with your pattern piece, we're now going to flip it. One of the other things I like to do is to have a consistency of where the channel stitches are. So since I picked like a 1/4 inch down from there, I'm going to do the same on this one. I still have my cat in its prominent position. The lines are lined up. And now I'm going to mark this one and cut it out. And the next thing will be to mark the main panel piece. I'm going to pick a center. I'm going to use that as my center, that row of dots right there. And I have to switch colors because I won't be able to see the white. But I'm just going to trace around this one and cut it out as well. So go ahead and mark and cut out your pattern pieces, and then I'm going to meet you at the sewing machine and give you a hint on how to keep this all together. Okay, now that we have all our pieces cut out to the proper size using the patterns, I want to point something out to you that I learned kind of the hard way. One of the nice things about doing a video tutorial is that I can tell you helpful hints that if I were to write them in the pattern, you probably wouldn't read. So what I've discovered is as I cut this out and I continue to work with it, applying the piping, etc., some of these channel stitches will start to come undone because they're not back tacked. We cut through the back tacking if we did that at all. So what I would recommend doing very strongly is to stitch all the way around using a number 2 stitch length. So I've put my regular sewing foot back on and I set my machine to 2, and now I'm just going to stitch all the way around the edge, and this is going to help keep those channel threads from becoming undone as we're working through the project. Unfortunately, I made a set of golf club head covers, and when I was all finished, they were beautiful. The problem being, however, that I noticed that one of the channels had come undone almost halfway through the head cover. And there's no way to fix that except to remake it. So this is really important that you do this, because as you can see, they're starting to come undone already. So this one in particular. So this just kind of prevents that from happening. So I suggest you do that on all your pieces before you move forward. Now we're going to prepare the piping. And the piping needs to be cut out on the bias. So as you can see here, with the grain of the fabric running this way, you don't have any stretch. So if we turn it and cut it out on a 45-degree angle, look at all that stretch we get. And that's what we want for piping. So we want you to find the 45-degree angle and cut out your 1.5-inch strips on the bias. So go ahead and do that. If you are making more than one head cover, I suggest that you follow the directions on the pattern as far as how much piping material to cut out for all the club head covers that you're making at the same time. Okay, I've cut out my 1.5-inch strips on the bias, and now we need to stitch them together. So I'm going to take them over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to stitch these together. We want to stitch them at a 45-degree angle, and we want all the angles of the entire length of the piping material to be stitched in the same direction. So when you have these nice neat angles that you can stitch together, you basically just lay one on top of the other like this, and you create a 45-degree seam, and you create a 1/4-inch seam approximately from that point to this point. So go ahead and sew those together. Now when you're cutting these 45-degree angles using your fabric, sometimes you don't have a nice clean 45-degree angle. So for example, you may have something at the end that's rather squared, and the other end could be like this. So you simply just lay that on top of each other, and now you're going to sew from here to here. And then cut off all this extra waste. And you get your 45-degree angle. So now I'm going to take this over to the pressing board, and I'm going to iron the seams open, and then I'll show you how to sandwich the piping cord in the bias. Okay, now I am going to show you how to sandwich the piping cord in this fabric, and it's very essential that you have a piping foot if you've never done this before. If you're an experienced sewer, you could probably get away with using a zipper foot, but this really keeps the cording stays right in there and feeds through the machine just fine. We want to move our stitch needle position 3 clicks to the right. Drop it down. Start a little bit in so you have some room to grab, and you just start stitching. Using a piping foot allows you to make sure that your stitching line is as close to the piping as possible. I use my fingers kind of to push it in. All right. Using a piping foot allows you to keep the stitching close to the cording. You don't want to push or pull, you just want to let it naturally feed through the machine. Stopping and sandwiching. It's really nice to use a thick, sturdy cord because it helps the head covers maintain their curved shape. In addition to the fact that a prominent piping, third color or second color, really stands out and makes the head covers look good. So, stitch down the entire length of your piping cord. Then we're going to take it over to the cutting board, and I am going to trim the seam 1/4 inch down the entire length before we apply it to the head cover. So I will complete this, and we'll come back to the sewing machine when I'm done. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about vinyl or leather. I said that these club head covers can be made from that, and they turn out beautifully. First off, I would not recommend that if you are not an experienced sewer that you use vinyl or leather initially. It requires a little more fussing around. It's very thick when you apply the two layers together. And the reason I'm bringing this up right now is in regards to piping. You cannot use the piping cord that's provided in my finishing kit if you are using vinyl or leather. You have to use a much smaller cord because there is just too much bulk to fit under the sewing machine when you're applying not only this, but another layer of vinyl underneath. So you have to use a much smaller piping cord. And I would recommend a purchased piping cord. And this is the purchased piping cord. See how small it is compared to mine. Now mine doesn't end up looking like that because when you are stitching it together, you stitch into the cord a little bit. But as you can see, it's still considerably larger than the purchased. So if you are using vinyl or leather, remember that you cannot use my cording provided in the finishing kit, as well as it is highly recommended not to use vinyl or leather as your piping material for the very same reason. You're creating way too much bulk. So that being said, we are now going to apply the piping to the main panel piece. As we talk about bulk, something that we want to do at this top edge is trim away some of the piping. And the reason we're doing that is because we will have piping meeting two layers of foam and fabric, and it's just too much bulk right here at this junction. What I like to do is open out the seam. So we're going to get our scissors in here, and we're going to cut just the threads. Try not to cut the fabric. We're going to peel it back, and we're going to cut away some of this piping cord. So now, when we apply it to the head cover, we can create an area where everything joins together and reduce the bulk. So I'm going to feel with my finger where I cut that, and I am going to apply it about 1/4 to maybe a 1/2 inch down. And we're just going to clip that in place. When you apply piping, you always want the finished side in, raw edges together. And I'm just going to clip this in place at this time. Now I do want to point something else out. If you have an embroidery machine and you want to embroider on your main panel piece the club number or your name or anything else that you want to embroider, now would be the time to do that. You would do it right in the center of this club. I consider the center, when it's on the golf club, 2 inches down, and that would be the center of your embroidery. And you would do it at this point before you apply the piping. So now that I have the piping applied to one side, still using the piping foot with a 2.5 stitch length and 3 clicks over to the right, we're going to attach it. And of course, as I mentioned, there is no piping here until about this point, so you just sew. Make sure you back tack, because that is essential. You don't want it to come undone. And you just let the machine feed the piping through the groove in the bottom and stitch all the way around, keeping raw edges together. So you do this to both sides of this main panel piece, and then we'll talk about what to do to identify your club if you don't have an embroidery machine or access to one. I am going to show you how to create an optional loop that you then can apply an identifying club tag, which is available in my finishing kit. So I'm going to go ahead and apply the piping on the other side, and then we'll move on to the next step. So now it's time to attach the side panel pieces to the main panel. And what we want to do is take right sides together, and we want the curved edge at the top. So I'm going to clip this in place. I overlapped it about 1/4 of an inch because I want it to have a clean seam. And you just kind of clip it around like this. Requires a little bending and shaping. But again, having a piping foot keeps the needle close to the piping, and it feeds through, and it doesn't really require a lot of effort from you. Okay, so we've got the one side on, so I'm going to go ahead and start stitching. Remember, 3 clicks to the right. And again, why I like to use this thicker cord is because I can feel it better through the layers of fabric and foam. Although the piping foot is doing its job, I still like to see it. And as you can see, I got to play with this a little bit. And again, that goes back to my comment about leather. Leather is not as pliable, or vinyl is not as pliable. So all of these steps using vinyl and leather become a little more cumbersome for somebody who is not used to garment making or that type of sewing. So I'm keeping my raw edges together. I'm keeping the piping in the channel of the piping foot. And when we get up here, I have no piping, but I'll just kind of follow my stitching line. And what I like to do now is open it out and make sure I'm happy with how it looks. So now we're going to apply the other side exactly as we did before. Again, creating a little overlap before you clip it together. And bending and folding the fabric to fit the shape. These Wonder Clips come in handy. They're fabulous. In the old days we used pins, and pinning this would be really difficult through all the layers. And I, being kind of a rather spastic seamstress, would get poked constantly and have to take what I commonly refer to as a blood break or a bleeding break from continuing to work on my project. So I'm a big fan of Wonder Clips. They come in many different sizes. For this type of project, I like to use the little ones, but they have longer ones. They come in different colors, and they're just a fabulous invention for the sewing community. All right, I have applied the other side now, and you'll notice that the bottoms don't line up, and that's okay because we're going to trim it to make it line up. But before we do that, we again want to turn and make sure that we're happy with the way everything looks, and in this case I am. So I see that this is a little longer right along the stitching line, so I'm just going to cut right along that stitching line, and the same with this side. Okay, so now we're ready to apply the piping around the edge. So we turn it inside out again, and now we're going to apply piping around the entire edge. And again, it's right sides together, raw edges together, I mean. Following the curve, and you'll see when we get up here to the top why it was essential to trim away some of the bulk. And you'll also understand why, if you are using leather or vinyl, that you can't have additional thickness, because now we have piping meeting foam, and that's just a lot of bulk for under your machine. So by having cut away the piping there, we've made this just a lot easier to maneuver. You still have to go slowly. You can end up breaking a needle, as I have done many. Okay, I have applied the piping all the way around, and now I'm going to stitch it. Again, needle 3 clicks to the right, stitch length 2.5. I'm not going to push or pull. I'm just going to let it feed in all on its own. Apply this all the way around, and when we get to this top portion, we're going to have to go really slow because there is a lot of bulk. But having cut some of that away should help. All right. Now, as you can see right here, we have this portion is laying here. I like to drop my needle at this point, lift the pressure foot, and kind of move that to that side. It's awkward, I know, but essential. Okay, now that I'm at this pivot point, I take this piece and kind of pop it in the opposite side too, so I can sew this straight line across the top, ending right on top of the piping underneath. Go very slowly, and now at this point drop my needle, lift the presser foot, and continue on down this side. Now, that would have nearly been impossible to do if we hadn't trimmed away the piping cord, because there's only so much distance between the machine and the bottom of the foot, and it can't handle it. Back tack at the bottom, and the reason we're not doing it at the bottom, trimming away piping cord, is because it's not meeting additional piping cord. So now we have it all sewn in, turn it around, and there you go. Okay, at this point, if you did not embroider on your golf club, you're going to want to create an optional loop that you will have on your club where you can attach a club identifier. So I'm going to show you how to make that. So before I made my piping, I cut off a piece that's about 2.5 inches long, and I've taken it to the ironing board and I folded it in half and pressed. Then I opened it out and I pressed each raw edge on the sides towards that middle fold. And now I'm going to fold it over one more time. So now I have no raw edges, everything's tucked inside, and I'm going to stitch down each side of this. I've switched back to a regular foot. I know there's a lot of foot switching going on during this, but it is about using the right materials. I've tried to be lazy and sew this with my piping foot still on, and it's not possible because there's not enough fabric underneath to grab and feed it through the machine straight. So we're going to be cutting the edges, but I just want to have both sides stitched like that. All right, now we're going to apply this to the club cover, and we're going to fold it in half. In my pattern, initially I suggest folding it like this, and that's one way to do it, but I think that I kind of prefer it like this, and it's entirely up to you, optional, however you want to do it. So we're going to turn the head cover inside out again. We're going to find the middle marking, which is right here, and I'm going to center this loop down. I want to have at least 1/4 inch extended beyond the piping. So I've got my loop centered. I'm going to pop it on the machine, and I'm just going to stitch in place right along the piping. And that's how we create the loop, so that when it's pulled out and the rib knit is on, you have your loop in place. All right, we're almost finished now. The next step is the rib knit. I'm going to pull the knit material out of my finishing kit. I'm going to open it out, and I'm going to lay it flat on my cutting table. Doesn't matter that this edge is all scraggly, but I want to mark a piece according to the pattern measurements. So, I'll just use my chalk marker. You can cut it with a rotary cutter if you like, but I like to use scissors because I stay in the channel pretty well, or the rib channel pretty well with scissors. So I've marked this, and now I'm going to cut it out. So when you cut your rib, you'll notice that there are rib channels, and my scissors move easily through the channel. And again, this does not have to be perfect. As you can see, my scissors move through the channel and then cut the appropriate length. Pay special, you'll notice that the rib is running horizontally, lengthwise, and there is a right and a wrong side to the rib. One side is bulkier, and this is the right side. So you're going to fold this in half, and you are going to stitch this entire seam, back tacking at both ends with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. All right, I've determined what the right side is. As you can see, it's a little bulkier here on this side than it is on this side. So this is considered the right side of the rib knit fabric. So now that I've done that, I have lined my edge of my sewing foot up with a 1/2 inch mark. And the thing you want to do here is just run down the length of the rib the entire way. The seams don't have to be perfect. What does have to be perfect is that this rib is somewhat straight. You don't want to have something like this occurring. So you want to keep this rib as straight as possible. Sew down the length. Back tack at both ends. That's really important. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to go and press this seam open. And that just makes it a little neater for when you are folding the wrong sides together. Okay, I have pressed the seam open, and now I'm going to reach my arm into the tube, and I am going to fold it wrong sides together. Just like this, aligning the two seams against each other. I've doubled the rib knit to create a finished edge that we don't have to sew, and also to make it a little more durable and thick on the head cover. So now that I've folded it properly, we need to cut it according to the pattern directions. So what I've done is I folded it with the seam side and placed it flat. Now I need to mark according to the directions. So you want to go from the folded edge, and you want to come 9 inches up from the folded edge, which would be right here. Then you want to come in following the directions on the pattern and draw another line straight up to the raw edge. And what we're going to do is cut this. Now what helps in the cutting is if you take a ruler and just kind of make sure that you're just cutting the 2 layers or 4 layers of fabric, and that something hasn't folded up and gotten in your way. I like to start from this edge, cutting through all 4 layers. And pivoting at this mark. I don't need that any longer. So this is the throwaway. Now I want to open it out so the seam is in the middle. Okay, what you'll notice here at the top is that one side is shorter than the other, and that's fine. Just trim away the extra. And in some cases, you may see that your fabric will kind of flay out a little bit. You don't want that to happen. You want to have a nice straight edge that's pretty equal. So if your fabric has flayed out, just take your scissors and cut it down. The next thing we're going to do is just round the edges. This doesn't have to be a template. You're just going to round the edges of this top. There we go. So this is the product. And now I want to zigzag around all of it to hold the two pieces together so that when I apply it to the head cover, I am not catching some of the rib. Okay, now I want to zigzag these two pieces together. And because I want to have optimal stretch, I'm going to go and adjust my stitch width to 4 and my stitch length to 4. And switch back to your regular sewing foot, and I'm going to zigzag off the edge, just like this. And the purpose of this zigzagging is purely to make sure that your top and bottom are married together as one, so that when you're sewing, it doesn't come apart. And just go ahead and zigzag around the whole edge. All the way around. Again, neatness is not an issue. No one will see this. You can stretch it a little bit while you're sewing, but try not to do that on the flat portion. All right, now we're ready to lay it into the head cover and attach it and finish. All right, I have zigzagged all around my sock tubing, my rib knit, and now you're probably wondering, how do we attach it? Well, the first thing we're going to do is attach the bottom to the bottom. We're going to attach this edge to the bottom of the head cover. So we're going to flip it as so, leaving the folded portion up in the top. We're going to flip back this tongue, and then we're going to find our center seam, and we're going to put it right in the middle of the bottom of the head cover. Then we're going to flip this to the side like that, and here's that little L we created. So I'm going to clip that there, and I'm going to do the same to this side. Now, depending on the size of the club that you're making, you may have to do a little stretching, and you'll do that while you're sewing. So we have this clipped in place. As I pointed out, the folded portion is inside the head cover, and we'll just lay that tongue back for now. So I've got a straight stitch, or excuse me, I've got a regular sewing foot on. We're going to use a straight stitch, a 2.5, and I switched color of thread. And I've done that so when I'm finished, I can check my work on this side. And I want to be able to see. We want to make sure that when we do stitch this together, that the last line of stitching is the stitching that we're doing. If we don't, you will end up seeing some of this white thread in your seam, and you certainly don't want to see that. Okay, so how we're going to start, and this requires a little maneuvering, we're going to start stitching on the outside of our piping right here. And we're just going to find a spot, stuff it under the machine, and we're going to start stitching on the outside of the piping, and we're going to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So we get to the back tack, kind of stretch this out. Go slowly when you go over the piping. We did not trim any piping material away at the bottom. It wasn't necessary, but still go slowly. Let the feed dogs do their work. You don't want to push or pull. Continue sewing. I'm not pushing or pulling, I'm just pressing down on the piping. And then when we get to this side, we want to end our stitching right here on the outside of the piping. And back tack and remove it from the machine. So as you can see, we have a straight line of stitching all the way across, and when you look inside and check that it all looks good, and it does to me. So now what we're going to do is we're going to lift this tongue, reach in and pull this socking out of the inside of the head cover. Okay, I'm going to cut this loose thread. Okay, so next we want to attach the tongue portion to the outer edge of our head cover. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to find the middle by folding, and then I'm going to take that middle and I'm going to put it right up there on that loop, and I'm going to put it in place with clips. And I'm going to do this all the way down both sides. And I want to maintain a straight line of ribbing right here. I don't want to see this side lower, that side higher. I want to maintain a straight line of ribbing. So what I do is I will alternate sides as I'm clipping, just to make sure that I'm getting that straight line. So let me finish clipping this, and we'll talk about how we're going to sew it. And last one on this side. Okay, now we want to switch to our piping foot, which I have placed somewhere. Here we go. We want to stay at our 2.5 stitch length, but now I want to move my needle position 3 clicks to the right. Okay, we are now going to find where we started our sewing right here, and we're going to want to start our stitching for around here at that point. And this is kind of bulky to shove underneath the machine, so what I like to do is just kind of sew my way into it, and the feed dogs will push it through, and the piping will automatically find its way into the notch. So here we go. So I'll back tack here, and then I'm very slowly going to stitch this rib knit all the way around. And as you'll see, when I remove the clip, some of the rib knit is extended beyond the edge of the head cover, and that's fine. We don't really care what happens on the inside of the head cover. What we care is what happens on the outside with this rib knit, and we want to maintain a nice vertical line of the ribbing. So we are approaching the difficult part. So I'm going to continue to stitch up to about this point, and then I'll show you what I do to get through that. Okay, I am now going to drop my needle, and I'm going to lift up and kind of push that under and create a little flatter sewing area for me. So I can still feel where my rib is with my fingers. So I'm slowly going to stitch around all that bulk. And now I'm at the part where I will do my straight stitching. And again, we have something going on here, so the best thing to do, stitch a little bit in, drop your needle, lift or press your foot, and push all that under and give yourself a level sewing surface here. Continue to go slow. Okay, now see how that's kind of wonky? We don't want that. So I'm just going to kind of pull it up. Because like I said, it doesn't matter what it looks like on the outside. What matters is what it looks like on the front here. So if I left this clip in place, we would end up with a disaster. So adjustments are made on this head cover when applying the rib knit as we go. Earlier I talked about if your rib knit comes out flayed, you want to trim it narrow, and there's no perfect measurement for that, because you will then make your adjustments as I'm doing right now while you're sewing. And I'm almost finished, so I'll show you why I switched color of thread. So now we get to that juncture where we started, and very slowly, because it's thick, we're going to go back tack, and we are finished. Okay, so as you can see, I have a very nice straight rib knit. Nothing's pulling that way or pulling that way. And I do have some overhang. Doesn't really matter. But what we're going to do now is check to make sure that this burgundy thread is our last line of stitching. And as you can see here, and I don't know if you can, it's not. So if I were to turn this club head cover right side out, I would see a row of white stitching between the fabric and the piping. I don't want that. So I'm going to go back on this side and re-stitch in the areas. And again, let the piping foot walk on. There we go. I'm going to make sure that I am stitching over my last line of stitching, because I don't want any white threads to show. So you can do this afterwards, after you turn it, and you can see that some white threads are showing, and that's fine. I just don't like to turn my head cover more than I have to. All right, we've done that side. Now we want to check the other side. And right here we have some white thread, and right there, so we'll just go over this again as we did on the other side. Shove this up there, let the feed dogs feed it on, and just ensure that we have a perfect seam. So I wouldn't be able to see this as well if I didn't change thread colors, and so that's what I did. Okay, so as far as I'm concerned, we're finished. You can neaten up all of this by clipping threads. Nobody is going to see the inside of your head cover, and none of these threads are going to affect how it fits on your golf club. So I think we might be finished. So I'm going to put my hand in here. It's a little, got to work it through a little bit, and grab this head cover and try to turn it. And again, if we made our rib knit any tighter than the width that is designated on the pattern, we'd have a really tough time doing this. There we go. So now we open this out, grab our piping, spread everything out, take a look and see how it turned out. And guess what, folks? We have finished our head cover. Good job. So now all we have to do is attach the golf club identifier tag on here, and you're good to go. Thank you very much. All right. I hope you guys had fun creating your head covers. I would really appreciate it if you would upload a photo of your finished product on my Instagram account at Golf Gear by Darcy. That way we can help others get inspired to create their own unique head covers, as well as show off your work. Stay tuned as I develop more products for us to make together, and I really appreciate your support. Have a good day.